So a little new and unusual. I'm at home today, by the shed, hanging out. Um, so been kind of irritated today, and I drew cards a little bit ago, and like the first one up was uh, Kali Ma, and it's talking about divine severance and cutting the cords and not getting pulled into unnecessary drama. And there's been some drama. um, so been kind of pissy. Um, I've talked about my connection with my family a few times, and have been having some issues with just a bunch of different things, like with my dad, like boundaries and respecting my boundaries when I say I don't want to get the religious bullshit sent to me, and then he was continuing to send it to me, and it was a big ordeal. And it's been kind of, I don't know, it's just not a real fabulous environment. I've talked about that too. I've talked about being irritated at the fact that I'm 40 years old and back home with my parents, and many times, because that is one of my bigger frustrations at the moment. Um, Today there was drama because apparently my mom went with my dad to a doctor's appointment yesterday, and at the appointment his blood pressure was like 200 over some other god awful high number, and she found out that he'd stopped taking his meds like a week ago at least. And it's like, okay, first off, he is on enough medications for health issues, heart issues, blood pressure issues, all that fun stuff, that I'm pretty sure there's going to be a few of them that if you quit taking them cold turkey, there's going to be side effects, or consequences of some sort. But then having a blood pressure that's that high anyway, obviously can cause you to like have a stroke or some other thing, like die or whatever. And I think he took his morning meds today. Don't know about any of the others or how long it would even take for any of them to be effective again after he quits cold turkey, and um, then starts them back without any kind of doctor um, monitoring, since some of those probably needed to be restarted a little slower after an abrupt ending. And it's just kind of a hot mess. And hold on a second, my dogs are barking. Um, um, but yeah, so there's obviously issues there. But then kind of wanders around like a dying cat, just moaning and groaning and making sure he feels like shit. It's like, well, of course you do, because you stopped doing what you were supposed to be doing to not make you feel like shit. And the reason this is so dramatic at the moment is, my mom ended up taking him to the heart hospital. Because obviously he needed some kind of attention on this end, and he was just moaning and groaning and making sure everybody knew how miserable he was and all this stuff. So she took him over there, and she's kind of pissed about it. I was kind of pissed about the whole thing because it's unnecessary bullshit, really. There's an issue with the car that I've been driving, which I mean, it's a 2008, so it's not new. And it's a borrowed vehicle because it is theirs, and since it's the third one and I needed a vehicle when I got back up here, I just kind of have taken over driving that one because, I mean, first off, it is the old one. It is the one that it is not an issue for me to take my dogs in regularly, and I go skating a lot, and it's just like little short trips usually, sometimes bigger ones. But earlier, I started doing this thing where it was, well, it wasn't today it started. It's every now and then it'll like have something weird come up. More recently, there was something where like the battery was kind of hit and miss, and of course part of that was my fault because I had left a Bluetooth thing plugged in that I didn't think about it being an issue when the car's still running, or when the car's not running and it's still pulling on the battery or whatever. So that was me. Just didn't think about it. But beyond that, there have been other things like, okay, yesterday when I was driving it, I went over and picked my niece up from my brother's house after I had come home to get the dogs, and then went back to get her so we could go to the cemetery and walk. Well, when we were driving to the cemetery, it's like what my foot was doing on the accelerator wasn't lining up with how the car was moving. So, like, I had my foot on the accelerator and it wasn't going faster. I took my foot off the accelerator, and all at once it started like going like really fast there for a minute, and like I had to hit the brakes a couple times, knock it back the other way, but it was like, that's not good. And then when I was leaving the cemetery, then the check engine light came on. And then today it started doing this like weird thing where you got like this really jarring sensation, like kind of a thing, and it's got some noise, but it's not, I mean, you can hear it, but it's more of a feeling than the hearing it. And so he had said that when he took it to get the oil changed last, that the guy said to keep an eye on it because there was a little bit of a leak. So I asked him to check the oil on it today because it's been so long since I've done that. I was shown before and I don't remember where all that stuff is. I'll admit, I don't do cars. It's not my thing. So I asked him to check and make sure there's still oil in it because, I mean, it's still their vehicle too, so it should, I mean, even if it's not really used for anything exciting other than me taking my dogs places, it's still something to keep up with. So I asked him to do that. Just check the oil. That's no big deal. He knew yesterday that it was having some kind of issue, and he said he went out and drove it around and it didn't do anything, which honestly just makes me wonder if that actually happened or not. Because like every time I've started it today and yesterday, there's been something that's been screwy. But when I asked him to do that, he was like, he had his water, this big metal water cup, and his pills, and he was looking for a place just to slam them down so he could let us know that he was pissy about being asked to do anything because he feels like shit. And I mean, the problem with that is the fact that he chose to make himself feel like shit. He knows he is a heart patient. He knows he has had all these, issues. He's had, like 4 or 5 stents put in, has sleep apnea and high blood pressure and all sorts of that kind of crap that makes you feel bad, and he doesn't care to do anything about it. And Gidget's wanting me to play. we the thing is, he's been talking to his brother a lot, and his brother, I think, is kind of on the supplements instead of big pharma kick, and they're both into the religious stuff, and obviously there are some disagreements when it comes to belief systems and all this stuff. And therefore, when he was running over my boundaries completely, he kept shoving this stuff in my face, like, you need to come back to Jesus and blah blah blah. And it was just like, it's like, okay, going back to church would literally be a step backwards for where I'm at. It's like, I have outgrown it. I will not go back. And honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that my aunt and her husband are, I don't know, there's something with their specific church, which is not a very big church, but they rent out the place periodically for, like my cousin had her bridal shower there, my brother and sister-in-law had a baby shower there, so that kind of stuff. If it wasn't for that kind of stuff, I would not step foot in a church again. Done. And it's because, hold on. Okay, had to check it wasn't family showing up. It was a rabbit on the other side of the fence. Anyway, when I was going through my divorce, I was forced to see how my own belief systems had gotten me into the shitty situation that I was in. And that was, okay, the idea that if I wasn't married by a certain point, then I would be a burden for the family, kind of a thing. That whole spinster thing. And that, okay, so there was that whole deal with the rumors that followed me around from the time I was 8 years old, and then, reappeared when I was 30 and 35, because they weren't dead. But I also hadn't been able to process any of that trauma until after my friend died, and I finally realized that anything that I would have kept from him anyway, he would already know on the other side. So I figured, I might as well just write to him and get it out of my system. So when I was writing to him, I started releasing a lot of stuff, and I started making a lot of connections with, like the fact that what had always been assumed to have happened for me, or that had been assumed that I had done, was bullshit, and I had not done it. But what had happened was I had my voice taken away from me and was not given the opportunity to stand up for myself and say what actually happened, and that it wasn't the bullshit that everybody just pinned on me. So that stayed pinned on me for my whole life. And then how did that affect me going forward? Well, I made a lot of decisions because it was basically that whole Scarlet Letter thing, and I figured I'd already been branded as a whore or whatever, and so I made some decisions that ended up hurting me, and that I realized was not who I was. But I still made those decisions because of the bad beliefs that around this thing that had been said and basically forced upon me. And I never had the opportunity to stand up for myself and say otherwise. So, I made some decisions that hurt me, and going back to, okay, my first serious boyfriend after Okay, I dated the one guy from high school, my sophomore year of high school to sophomore year of undergrad. Then after that, flew solo for a couple years. Not necessarily because I wanted to, but didn't exactly have good ideas on the whole relationship end of things anyway. But then I end up with this guy who was a good guy. And we had a good connection. And within the first couple months, we were having this long heart-to-heart conversation. And, okay, so while I was in high school, the guy that I dated then, and then one guy that's still a really good friend, even though we don't talk that much anymore, he was still like a brother, so that still counts. Every now and then we reconnect. But those two, and then I had one other friend that I told about my suicide attempt. And, they were kind of protective of me in a way, respecting of the fact that I had this thing that I was dealing with and wouldn't talk to anybody else about, but I told them. So the guy after undergrad, I told him about that stuff too. But there's this other thing that I felt like I couldn't talk to him about. Like I felt like I was supposed to, and then I just couldn't bring myself to open up about it. So then it felt like there was always this rift, because there was something that I was basically keeping from him. So then it became a part of me it became a thing that I was trying to hide. And all it did was suffocate me. And it, there developed this rift, but it took a little while before it really grew into something that we could actually realize, we weren't as close as we sometimes thought we were. But with that guy, he was, okay. So, lovely evangelical Christianity had this big movement back when I was in high school about the whole purity movement, and people had purity rings, and you were going to save yourself for marriage, and blah, 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 all this bullshit. And I jumped on the bandwagon and had kind of some beliefs about, people that actually did things outside of marriage and how bad that was, and made the decision that I wouldn't do that for myself, blah, blah, blah. Well, until I found somebody that I truly believed that I was going to marry, and believed it so completely that we didn't wait for marriage. So then there was this thing that came up where I always felt like, basically because the church and the whole purity movement had basically told me that anybody who did this was a whore, so you don't do that stuff. That's bad. That'll send you to hell. So on top of the not confessing everything that I felt like I was supposed to him, then this guilt started growing because we were doing this thing that I was told I could go to hell for. I wasn't supposed to do that. And so there was more trauma on that end that kind of came up. So then I have these two things that are nagging at me, and that I'm basically running from myself with, whatever. So then it got to a point where the sexual connection was basically the main part of the relationship, because it became something I was trying to hide behind. And if we started having a conversation that started to go too serious, then I could distract him with this. So, it just kind of became a thing that obviously was not a healthy thing, and was very damaging to me, and not real respectful and I guess favorable for him either, because it was all wrapped up in my bad belief systems. So after it got to the point where he and I broke up, there were some things that were said that were kind of hurtful, and his brother got married before we broke up, and I loved his brother and his brother's fiance. They were cool people to hang out with, and we spent a lot of time with them because his brother was his best friend. So his brother had a bachelor party, and there was like 4 or 5 of them that went to Las Vegas. And basically, when my ex got back, he said something that what it felt like he had said was that it was unfortunate that I was alive because if I didn't exist, he could have hooked up with random women in Las Vegas. And I'm pretty sure he didn't actually say he wanted me dead or anything, but that was how it felt to me. Like, the energy was, it would be a better thing if I had passed away and he could use that as a sympathy ploy to hook up with random chicks. And so that was the thing. So that made me feel like shit. And there were a couple other things that had happened. Like, once we were at a party at one of his friends' houses, and there was like cornhole tournaments and beer and all this fun stuff. And I went, and I wasn't drinking because I was the designated driver. Knew he and his buddies were gonna get trashed because that's what they did. They were like, hanging out with them was like hanging out with a bunch of frat boys, even though like they were past college and all that stuff. That's where they were. So it started getting later into the evening, and the guy I was dating accidentally spilt his beer on my legs, and I had shorts on, so it was all nice and sticky all down my legs. So I went and cleaned up that as best I could, but still can't get that smell of beer off that easily, and I got ate alive by mosquitoes. And I was getting kind of cranky because like they were biting me every little bit. And he's like, well, I don't know what you're talking about because I'm not getting bit at all. And I was just like, okay, so you just don't trust me that I'm saying I'm getting eaten up by mosquitoes because you're drunk and having a good time. Great. And then the next day it was kind of a little bit of a reprieve for me when I like went to leave the room, and he saw how mosquito bitten my legs were, and was like, oh my god. And it's like, that from last night? It's like, yeah, somebody dumped their fucking beer on me. It's like, he didn't want to leave because he wasn't having issues, but I was, so it didn't matter because that's not believable, whatever. So yeah, there was that. It's getting kind of dark, and I'm trying to figure out if I should just go to the porch. Might as well try, I guess, because otherwise I'm going to have no light. Okay, so I'll try not to be too distracting with the rocking chair. So there's like just little things that were starting to pile up until we were on the phone. We were text messaging at work. We were both at our night shift jobs, 2 different locations, but in the same town. And randomly out of the blue, I just fired off, I feel like we're growing apart. But he apparently hadn't thought about it until I said that, and then he thought about it a lot. And then, yeah, hold on. I'm going to wrap it up because I think they might be home, so I'm just going to call it. And as always, I appreciate you, and I will try this again tomorrow. Scratch that, dog's lie. Said somebody was here, nobody was here. So anyway, like, that whole to have it come to that kind of a screeching halt was difficult, obviously. And then I had to face the fact that, you know, we had this whole sexual connection that I had spent my whole high school and early college believing that was just this big sinful, awful thing. And then we didn't get married, but I had to believe that we were going to, because otherwise I wouldn't have gone that route. But then we didn't. And then we broke up, and it was that much more traumatic. So then I ended up I felt like shit about myself. One bonus thing I did, I had this 15-day fast where I didn't know how long I was going to fast for. I just knew that, you know, I could fast for a few days, and it usually made me feel better and make some connections for, whatever I was going through. And it did. So 15 days. And I get just frustrated. I'm not playing with her, so she has a toy. She's shaking real hard and throwing rocks around. That's what that noise is. Anyway, so after that, I started thinking that, I was thinking that I wanted to do like marriage and family therapy, particularly with military families. And so I figured, well, that's a particular population that I felt like if I was going to try to work with, it felt like to have some credibility with them, that I need to know something about the culture of it. So I ended up joining the military. And I went in as a chaplain assistant since I had my bachelor's degree. I ended up going in as an E4 specialist. And okay, take a break, chill. The point of me doing that, aside from the military experience, to understand something about the culture, as well as to she don't like it when I put it up. I started thinking that maybe I would pursue Army chaplaincy. So I figured chaplain assistant. First off, it had a bonus with it, so there was that for signing on. Slight snag was the unit that I would be attached to, since I was National Guard, was up in what was that? I gotta think about it. It was in northern Indiana. I don't remember what the town was, but it was like a 3.5 hour drive from me. So for one weekend a month, 3.5 hour drive there, 3.5 hour drive back. Figured, I can do that. That's no big deal. And that was partly true. So I went this route, and then while I was in basic training, there's that whole thing. First off, it's males and females, not men, women, not boys and girls, nothing like that. Males and females. And if you were to go anywhere, and especially to approach any of the drill sergeants, you had to have a battle buddy. And if it was a one-on-one situation, that better be the same sex as you. So if you were caught in a male-female battle buddy situationship, then you get all sorts of trouble for that. Because, assumptions, if nothing else. So if it was a mixed group, there had to be 2 of one and 1 of the other, but they preferred 2 females, 1 male. 2 males and 1 female was not wise, and they said as much. And so that wasn't really any kind of issue. But it was just weird stuff that we talked about. And yeah, it made sense. Okay, so then there was the whole thing that made me realize as an empath, which was having to battle buddy the girl who needed to talk to the cadre, and then finding out that she had been sexually assaulted by a drill sergeant. And that was a whole ordeal in and of itself, obviously. And I've come to realize that I think that was the bigger point of my military experience, was to realize how prevalent sexual assault is in the military. And I don't know how many freaking drills I went to where we had some sort of training about, all the sexual assault bullshit, because people couldn't, respect keeping your hands to yourself or anything like that. And, just the whole situation was toxic, and there were some people that, we had, one girl that hooked up with another girl, and she had been in a different, basic training group, and she got recycled back because they were caught. She was having this relationship with somebody, and that's a no-no. And so she got recycled to our group, which I wanted to say she was like pretty far along, and then she came back to us and we were like 2 or 3 weeks in, so she had to do a lot of it over. And was kind of the the poster child for don't do this. Don't fuck up like that. Yeah. So yeah, then there's the whole basic training thing, and that wasn't really, I wasn't interested in those people anyway. That was no big deal. In fact, the one thing it did do was take me from having any sort of attraction to the military uniform and being like, oh fuck no, if they're in uniform, no. Just from the little bit that I saw from my experience was nope. And one thing that I kind of struggled with later, it was toward the end, like the last week, I want to say, when it started to get a little chilly, because we started basic in September, and then by mid-November it was getting kind of chilly. We were in South Carolina, so it would be cold in the morning and then really hot in the day and then really cold in the evening. And one day we were at the bank or whatever, lined up, going through and getting out whatever we needed, And I don't even remember what all was happening over there, but we were over there for a ridiculously long time and standing in formation in the cold for a long time. And I think part of it was just the point that we were standing in formation in the cold and had to get used to it, because you never know what kind of bullshit you're going to encounter with the military experience, which makes sense. But because it was cold, at one point the drill sergeants called out, make your battle buddy happy or whatever. And the point was, formation was getting closer because it was colder. So we were trying to use body heat to stay warm, but not touching, but at least closer. So we didn't have the breeze going through as much and all that crap. So there's this guy behind me. And, I mean, mind you, my basic training experience wasn't fabulous anyway. I don't think anybody goes into basic training expecting a fabulous experience per se. But especially since that whole empath thing came up, where I realized, well, and I didn't realize at that time that I was picking up somebody else's energy. That was a hindsight discovery. But because I was kind of in this fuck you and fuck everybody kind of state of mind, there was a guy behind me that decided it was okay for him to just lean his junk up against me. And my thought was, what the fuck? It's almost over anyway, you know, and it was cold and whatever. So I leaned back. Not a lot. Enough. And the next day, because, okay, they had these, like, he was obviously all about getting the opportunity to feel anybody up. Yeah. So in the barracks, they had these intercom systems so the drill sergeants could listen in to everything that was happening and being said in the barracks, and we could ask them questions, or if it was the night watch, you know, they could talk with the drill sergeants over the speaker or whatever, that kind of a thing. Well, obviously, one drill sergeant, the one that was like I always say he was a mean version of my brother, because he reminded me of my brother in so many ways, but he was just, and I don't think he's legitimately a mean human being across the board, but that was the vibe that he was giving off because he was a drill sergeant. So the next day, he kind of looks at me with that oh so familiar look that followed me all throughout high school, where somebody's looking at me like they knew something about me. And I knew immediately what that whole bullshit was about. And, you know, it was one of those things that the what the fuck and who cares mentality, it was like all these past traumas and this current rage from a situation that I didn't even realize wasn't mine to carry. And, you know, it was just like, it doesn't matter. Fuck it. That was where I was at that point. And then when he's looking at me like that all over again, it's like, here we are again. Yet again. And that was irritating. And, I mean, really kind of soul-crushing in a way. And it all goes back to that whole idea that I allowed people's beliefs about me to affect how I felt and believed about myself. And since I wasn't at the capacity to start processing it, to understand that the thing that started it all wasn't even anything to begin with, I just accepted it. It's like, well, there's more proof that I'm a whore, whatever, you know? And obviously that had me in a not real super place. When I got out of basic training, I got on a dating website briefly. There were a couple of them, and first off, I found the Christian ones were really sleazy. So yeah, didn't go that route too much. I mean, I talked to a couple people off of them, and the one I actually went out with, okay, so if it were to happen today, I would have just met somebody somewhere. Like, I wouldn't take the risk of anything happening by letting somebody drive me somewhere. But my ex that I met after undergrad and that ex, we hit it off right away and had a pretty good connection, like when we were talking on the phone, and loved talking on the phone to each other. And I didn't have any second thoughts about letting him pick me up from my house. This other guy, we had these plans. I think we were going to go bowling, and I think bowling, and then food. And then as he's driving, he says, well, I thought we'd just go back to my place. It's like, didn't like that at all. But still, I mean, I was already in the car with him. It's like, I didn't know what to do. It's like, okay. So we go back to his house and he orders pizza. And he's this, good Southern Baptist Christian type. And he does this vacation Bible school bullshit and like all this stuff, and he had military experience too. So we talked a lot about military stuff. And I wanted to say he was Navy or something. But anyway, it was just a whole weird thing. And he showed me pictures from like his military time, and he was a little bit older than me, and it was just a weird night. But I got this very strong sense that all he was looking for was somebody to be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. I was like, well, he didn't try anything, but he did kind of hint that he would totally be willing to hook up if I wanted, or if I was okay with it. It's like, nope. That did not happen. But anyway, that was like when he took me back home. That was the one time I was very confident and able to say, I think we're looking for very different things. And never saw him, heard from him again. But that was just one of those things. Like, before I got out of the truck, it's like, thanks, but no. And, that was what I said, was that I thought we were looking for very different things. So, we should just go our separate ways. And so we did. But because my wounded pride could only take so much on that end anyway, it wasn't too much later that I ended up talking to somebody. I mean, we weren't talking very long. And basically did just hook up. And then I really felt like shit about myself. And then I told my best friend about it because I was feeling like shit about myself. And she just was like, who are you? I don't even know who you are anymore. It was like, ouch. And so after that one, since I was feeling so awful about myself, I went, I bought myself a card and flowers and apologized to myself. Because I knew that was not something that I'd ever wanted. But at the same time, it was just, I was at the point of feeling so bad about myself that it just, there was that moment of thinking, what the fuck, it doesn't really matter, right? And except it did. I found out later it very much did. And then it made me realize that, I had allowed myself to get to this really shitty place, and make decisions that I knew were not decisions I would want to make if I was in a good headspace. And yeah, that was the big thing. However, since I was feeling shitty, and the quest was still on because I was, 29, and actually I think I turned 29 after I got, no, I was 29. I went in at 29, I think. No, 28. I don't remember. I have to figure out all this time. Anyway, I was feeling like garbage. And so then I kept going on the dating websites because I was old and soon to be a burden because I hadn't been married off by that point. And then damaged goods because, who's gonna want me after all this shit, right? So then I met my ex-husband. And when I was with him, like when we went out, I was working night shift at the group home, and so we went out for breakfast at IHOP at a location that was in between us. And I remember thinking, dude talks a lot. And it was no kind of, like I've said in other videos, we definitely didn't love each other, but we didn't even like each other, I don't think, really. He needed somebody to help him with his legal bullshit, and I needed to feel like I wasn't complete garbage. And my way of doing that was signing up on this for this freaking relationship that made me feel like shit. But that's what I thought I deserved, because that's what this whole, Christian bullshit movement made me feel about myself. Damaged goods and not worth it. And plus I was getting old, so who was going to want me at that point either? So, yep, we ended up together. And then, because I had also learned, from that other relationship that I could use sex to hide behind, then that came in way too early and became something else that made me feel like shit. And then I felt like, when the whole marriage thing came up, it was like I felt like I had to. There was no other option. I was garbage, basically. And so I went along with that. And I kind of basically checked out of myself as much as anything. The day of the wedding, when most people would be doing things like, getting their hair done or nails done or whatever, and having a little girl's day in the morning, whatever. I went to my freaking seminary onboarding thing the day of my wedding. And it was mainly just to keep myself distracted so I wouldn't have to think about this thing that if I was honest with myself, I knew I didn't want to do. I knew it wasn't right for me. But because I was feeling like garbage, Taz, quit licking that floor. Taz, quit. Since I was feeling like garbage about everything, but especially me, I was just distracting myself. Because I don't want to think about it. I just want to get it over with. So, after everything was shit, perpetual shit, the entire time in that connection, when I was finally realizing that it was time to go and that I had no other option, it was done time. I just started wondering how I had gotten to that point where I had allowed myself to get into that kind of situation with somebody. And it was all these things that I had been told throughout my life about being trash and damaged goods and, a whore and all this bullshit that was absolute bullshit. But I let other people impose that on me. So I had just accepted it. It's like, that's how I ended up with somebody that treated me like shit. That's how I ended up in this connection where at the end of it, I don't remember when exactly he started saying it, but I think it was probably 2019, the start of the year. He started saying that he had these times he could feel himself getting so angry that he could see himself accidentally killing somebody someday. And I knew that was directed at me because at that point the whole custody bullshit was over. He'd won, and didn't need me anymore. So I knew that was directed at me. And then I knew he was jealous of my dogs because they were fiercely protective of me, and very loyal to me and hated him. Which, if you're a dick to him, then of course, he used to, the entire time we were together, if things were peaceful, it couldn't just be peaceful. He was going to walk through and just randomly yell, just to get the tension, that uncomfortable anxiety feeling. So the dogs hated being around him too. And he had one night where he was actively trying to he was actively chasing Taz around the house trying to kick him. And that was the one that I got in his face and told him to calm his ass down or get the hell away from my dogs. That kind of a thing. And then I think it was the last week that I was there, I was kind of reclining back on the bed. I had some pillows propped up, and was kind of leaning on them. And I was just kind of checked out and didn't want to deal with him, but he was in there, and he decided that I just needed to get laid and then I wouldn't go anywhere. And my dogs were all three on the bed right next to me. And, he came over and tried to force himself on me, and I shoved him off as hard as I could. And he stumbled back and hit the wall and then kind of fell down to the floor. And he was kind of stunned. But I'd actually done it, I think, more than anything. And as soon as that happened, all three dogs, jumped up And like Gidget laid across my chest, Taz stood over my waist, and Ziva stood over my feet. And they were just snarling and growling at him. And he, you know, when he stood up, he was irritated, obviously. More so that they had gotten as adamantly protective of me in that moment as they had. And, you know, he started swatting at Ziva, which she's the oldest, so she was the one we got like 6 months after we got married. And he was swatting at her, trying to get him to bite her, or to bite him. And I just had this, you know, that voice that, the wise voice that speaks to me periodically. And it just said, they're protecting you, and now it's your turn to protect them. You need to leave, because he will do something to them to hurt you, you know. And, you know, I realized that, you know, whether he enticed one of them to bite him so they had to be taken away, or whether he just flat out decided to kill him just to because that was the way he knew he could still affect me. He would have done something if I stayed there. And I had this brief thought that I was going to say. The other thought was, if he had done something to me, which I also knew was definitely not out of the realm of possibilities at that point, you know, because he already told me that he could see himself killing someone accidentally in his anger. It's like, if he were to do that, what would happen to my dogs? And so we left. You know, it was like the end of the week when we got out of there, because my parents were coming down, and yeah, we were doing all that. But still, you know, I just shifted into like high gear on getting my ass out of there. Did the bare minimum of what I had to in interacting with him. Still had to take him to work so I could take his kid to school, and then go back and pick him up and pick the kid up after school and all that fun stuff. So it was pick the kid up first, but yeah. But still, it's like, in the process of figuring out how I got into that situation, I realized that it all came back to like these bad beliefs that I had picked up from my time in the evangelical church, and, you know, this stupid fucking purity movement, and like all this bullshit, you know. And then how my family beliefs had pushed me in that direction too. You know, I mean, just the fact that I was never allowed to speak. Like, when I wanted to stand up for myself that one time, you know, it was just like all the guilt and shame was just piled on, and it was soul crushing. And as I realized how I got into that situation, I also realized, you know, this is exactly why I was meant to go down this dark, shitty path, that I didn't know, I always knew was going to end up in divorce, first. You know, and the big part of that, I think, was because there was, you know, okay, my grandpa always said his family doesn't get divorced. Like, it's somehow, you have to be less than if you find yourself in a situation where you get divorced. So I was the one that ended up being the person that had to get divorced because, well, I mean, I thought I was less than. Everybody was basically pointing me in that direction my entire life, and supporting that. And then I was doing things that, based on what they said, felt like it put me right there. Even though I realized deep down that wasn't who I was, it was still something that I had to contend with. And so it's really frustrating. But ultimately, I know this is exactly why I'm here at this time, why I've gone the path that I have, and made the discoveries about myself and about these belief systems that I have, that have shown me that they're bullshit, so I can start speaking against them. And I know that I am back in my parents' house at this particular time because this is something that's very much pushing me to continue on my path. And I watched this Kino Tarot video the other day, and like everything she said, it's like, oh, that's right, that's right, that's so right. And one of the things she said was that I'm here to ruffle some feathers. It's like, I've always known that. And I think that's why it's been such a challenge for me to learn to use my voice and speak up for myself. Because at some point when I figure this stuff out, and when I've talked in other videos about like just the anger that comes up, and I think that has come through very well at times, with how irritating it is. And like that deal with my dad earlier today, they're still not back, but there's like the whole thing is this dependence on somebody else outside of me to fix me, because I am awful. And therefore, if you believe yourself to be awful, then you'll do awful things and feel awful about yourself and just continue making bad decisions. If you're waiting for somebody to save you outside of yourself, then you're going to be waiting a long time, because that wasn't the point of the Jesus message. The point of the Jesus message was healing sucks, but it is possible to do it, and it is worth it to do it. And yet a lot of people don't want to do it because it is literally going through hell because you have to experience and understand the darkest parts of yourself, before you can truly appreciate yourself, really. And realizing that I was never what anybody else told me I was or wanted me to believe I was. And it was a matter of learning to use my voice to be able to choose to speak up for myself. And I think part of my path going forward will be speaking up for others as well, and speaking against these shitty, toxic systems. And here I am living in a situation where, my dad is very much still stuck in the system. And obviously it has its own drama, but that's where we're at. And yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I think that's why I'm here, though, is because, when I see the stuff that he's doing because of the things he believes, and seeing how backwards it is. There's a moth on the ceiling. It makes me, when it gets that angry spark in me fired up, then it makes me remember my purpose. And, you know, like I've always known parts of these things. It was just a matter of figuring it out. You know, you got to go through the lessons and learn the things before you can really step into who you're meant to be. And it's like I'm a work in progress, but I'm getting there. And I think that's the purpose of like this whole thing with YouTube, is just showing the process is not easy. It's not pretty. You know, I've said a lot of things that when people I know finally find them and realize what I've been saying, they're not going to be very happy. But that is essentially why I'm here, to ruffle feathers. And, you know, now that I'm realizing my truth more and more, you know, like that voice was always telling me, find your voice, speak your truth. It's like, I don't know what my truth is. How can I do that? Well, that's been the point of this learning journey. So here we are. Anyway, for real this time, I'm going to get off of here, and hopefully my computer will cooperate when I go to put this upload on there later. Yeah, I did another video earlier, and I'll probably still post it. It kind of, I don't know, it wasn't as focused. It was just kind of how I've shifted my schedule and how that's been affecting me recently. And well, hey, how it's been affecting me is I've come to this point where I can do this video and talk about a lot more stuff than I've even talked about in the past. So yeah. Anyway, as always, I appreciate you if you made it this far or not. And until the next time, see you later.